divide this presentation into two parts. First, I will introduce Kundalini Shakti, its tantric origins, its role as an integral component of the subtle body, and how this has changed. Second, I will provide 3 examples of Kundalini's modern interpretation, which are particularly relevant to culture. The Theosophical interpretation of Kundalini as electricity, its view as sexual energy, and the eco-spiritual belief in Kundalini as a terrestrial energy force. Kundalini is a Sanskrit term, means sheep who is coiled, signifying the power of the divine feminine. The notion of the divine feminine in Hindu traditions is commonly known as Shakti. On the one hand, Shakti refers to a distinct energy concept or power, which permeates the entire universe, including our planets and our bodies. And on the other hand, Shakti refers to the central goddess of the religious Hindu tradition known as Shaktism. Within Shaktism, a range of goddesses are considered as the highest deities and thus are the center of veneration. Now, among these goddesses, these Shaktis, we also encounter Kundalini Shakti. And like the twofold understanding of Shakti as power and a goddess, also Kundalini is described as a force and a deity. For this reason, until today, Kundalini is commonly referred to with a feminine pronoun. The medieval Shaiva Tantra corpus, which was composed around the 8th to 10th century CE, is the earliest known source that discusses Kundalini Shakti in its various forms. In these texts, we read of her as a goddess, as a component of the yogic subtle body, and as a semi-amorphous energy notion. And it is this interpretation as energy which plays the most significant role in Kundalini's transmission and transformational history. Kundalini's different interpretations are closely related. Accordingly, its association with energy is deeply entangled with its embedment in South Asian subtle body theories. As most of you may know, the subtle body is believed to consist of various components, including subtle centers, subtle channels. However, the subtle body theories also include theories or notions of energy streams. Kundalini then represents such an energy stream. And despite its understanding of a stream, meaning something that constantly moves, something that flows, tantric sources frequently describe her as a motionless, sleep-like notion residing within the body of the yogi and yogini at the base of the spine. More precisely, they depict Kundalini symbolically as a dormant serpent that lies coiled at the entrance of the central channel of the yogic subtle body. The source is further... It's not working? The source... Wow, what a difference!
Okay, so the sources further describe how yogic practices, I hope you got something from what I said so far. So it's all about Kundalini. So the tantric sources further describe how yogic practices can stimulate Kundalini. These practices result in the rise of the energy stream through the central channel, passing through the subtle centers to the crown of the head. The scriptures teach us how this process engenders spiritual potential, giving rise to paranormal attainments and ultimately leading to liberation. In medieval Tantra, Kundalini was thus viewed as both a Hindu goddess and a dormant energy residing within the subtle body. Throughout the following centuries, this view remained more or less unchanged, with only smaller variations. However, from roughly the 1880s onwards, Kundalini experienced significant transformations. And this is where my research kicks in. In what follows, I would like to introduce you 3 distinct examples of Kundalini's modern reinterpretations. My research has revealed that this process was particularly active during a period of approximately 100 years between the 1880s and the 1980s, with peaks during the 1880s, the 1920s, and the 1960s through the 1980s, the last representing the heyday of Kundalini's modern transformation. I refer to these periods as the 3 waves of Kundalini's modern transformation. Each of the following 3 examples of Kundalini's reinterpretation will highlight one of these 3 waves. The episode of Kundalini's modern reintroduction and reinterpretation started with the Theosophical Society, like so many other modern developments related to the occult. Founded in 1875 by Helena Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott, the Theosophical Society developed into a global organization aiming to synthesize religion and science and promote a universal religion. In the early 1880s, some Indian theosophists began translating tantric texts and came across the tantric serpent Kundalini. Its subsequent examination by theosophists can be seen as Kundalini's introduction to an international audience, marking the first chapter of its global dissemination. As a result of the initial theosophical examination of Kundalini and Tantra, an exchange between Indian intellectuals and European and American theosophists emerged on matters related what was believed as Tantra. Several influential theosophists contributed to this international exchange, who discussed, promoted, or dismissed Tantra and its Kundalini. Madame Blavatsky, the co-founder of the Theosophical Society, had an ambiguous understanding of Tantra. While she credited tantric texts as mystical and magical works, she further associated them with the worst form of black magic or sorcery. Her perception of Kundalini mirrored this ambiguity. On the one hand, she praised Kundalini as the great, pristine force, while at the same time warning against its lethal features. Over and above, however, she used several designations to describe Kundalini's electric characteristics. Aligning with the theosophical custom, she used the physical terminology to explain the existence of nature's hidden forces and powers, with Kundalini denoting a paramount example. Prior to their theosophical appropriation, electricity and other imponderables were discussed by scientists and mesmerists. The latter attributed imponderables to an underlying agent, thus anticipating Kundalini's association with electricity. Owing to key theosophical publications, the use of electricity as a metaphor for Kundalini became prevalent in theosophical circles during the 1880s and beyond. Notable examples include Sri Chandra Basu's Shiva Samhita, the esoteric philosophy of the Tantras, and Blavatsky's The Voice of the Silence. Sri Chandra Basu was a Bengali Sanskrit scholar and a member of the Theosophical Society. His translation and interpretation of the Shiva Samhita, titled The Esoteric Philosophy of the Tantras, poses a key example of a theosophical text that explained Kundalini as electricity. The Shiva Samhita was composed between the 13th and the 15th century CE and comprised tantric and hatha yogic components. And despite the yogic content, Sri Chandra's translation was considered or was celebrated as the first tantric translation into English and was used as a reference work for decades. The Shiva Samhita addresses Kundalini at several points, but the following quote clearly demonstrates his association of Kundalini with electricity. In the Muladhara lotus is the supreme goddess Kundali of the form of electricity in a coil. It has 3 coils and a half, like a serpent. Sri Chanda's translation inspired Blavatsky to equally describe Kundalini electrically in her The Voice of the Silence. There, she portrayed the tantric energy as an electric, fiery, occult or fohedic power, the great pristine force which underlies all organic and inorganic matter. The curious notion of fohedic power reinforced Blavatsky's endeavor to electrify Kundalini. In the Theosophical Glossary, Blavatsky details her understanding of fohed. There she writes, a term used to represent the active male potency of Shakti, the female reproductive power, in nature. The essence of cosmic electricity, an occult Tibetan term for primordial light, and in the universe of manifestation, the ever-present electrical energy and ceaseless destructive and formative power. So Blavatsky's association of Kundalini with fohed was therefore mainly used to describe Kundalini as electricity. The Theosophical Society and its collaborators were not the only occultists to be captured by Tantra and tantric energy concepts. Occult orders like the OTO also contributed to the appropriation and popular construction of Tantra and Kundalini. The Ordo Templi Orientis is an early 20th century initiatory and magical order that combined esotericism, Freemasonry, and sexual magic, later adopting Aleister Crowley's Thelemic philosophy as its central doctrine. In this cultural context, Kundalini was mainly linked to sexual practices and rituals. This emphasizes the need to consider how early interpreters like missionaries, Orientalists, and also high caste Indians of the 19th century, how they initially viewed Tantra. They often limited Tantra to a single, monolithic tradition based on what they saw as outrageously shocking sexual rituals or even black magic. While certain tantric schools do look back on a long tradition of sexual practices, these are by no means the only or even the most significant rituals. Nevertheless, in the Anglo-American world, Tantra became closely associated with sexual rituals or even defined as a sexual religion. And against this backdrop, Kundalini was frequently viewed as sexual energy, especially in its role within sex magic. While figures like the American Paschal Beverly Randolph, the Austrian Karl Kellner, and the German Theodor Reuss helped pave the way, there's no doubt that Aleister Crowley emerged as the most prominent representative of sex magic. Among members of the OTO, it is contested if Crowley referred to Tantra directly. He nevertheless contributed to the continuing misinterpretation of Tantra as a kind of sexual religion. This is well documented in a quote of an unpublished letter where Crowley writes, "All magical methods are merely methods of arousing Kundalini." Initially, Crowley did not view Kundalini exclusively as a sexual energy, but described it simply as a magical energy. Aligning with his theosophical description of Kundalini as magical power, Crowley also wrote, "Kundalini is the magical power, a sleeping serpent." It is thus likely that the theosophists such as Blavatsky and James Morgan Price served as primary sources for Crowley's early understanding of Kundalini. Over time, however, he increasingly incorporated sexual magic and thus equated magical energy with sexual energy. Consequently, Crowley's interpretation of Kundalini as sexual energy diverges from theosophical views, aligning with the idea of Tantra as a sexual religion. Through this engagement, Kundalini and other tantric elements were thereafter regarded as vital tools in sex magic rituals. If we move slightly forward in time, we encounter other intriguing interpretations of our tantric serpent. During the third wave of Kundalini's reinterpretation, Kundalini gained global recognition, experienced unparalleled popularity, and was understood in many different ways. One of these interpretative patterns was its association with a terrestrial energy force. This earthly form of Kundalini is often symbolized as a giant serpent embodying transformational and healing powers for humanity and the planet as a whole. The Theosophist George Arundel initiated the discourse on earth chakras and terrestrial energies and laid the foundation for the interpretation of Kundalini as an occult force of Mother Earth. This becomes apparent when, in his classic treatise, Kundalini, an Occult Experience, he speaks of the earth Kundalini and whirling wheels of fiery energy. His ideas were later supported by other advocates of terrestrial energies and supplemented by a more explicit treatment of terrestrial Kundalini energy. In this regard, Drunvalo Melchizedek and his concept of the Serpent of Light deserves closer attention. Based in Sedona, Arizona, the self-proclaimed prophet is best known for his interpretation of sacred geometry, like the flower of life, and his concept of the Merkaba, which he describes as an energy field enveloping both the human body and the planet Earth. In his book, Serpent of Light, The Movement of the Earth Kundalini and the Rise of Female Light, Melchizedek explores the concept of the Earth Kundalini, or what he terms the Serpent of Light. He presents this form of Kundalini as a transformational and eco-conscious force guided by the consciousness of Mother Earth. He writes, "The Kundalini has two poles, and one is in the exact center of the earth. The other is located on the surface, somewhere in the world. It is the consciousness of the earth herself that decides where it is to be." However, Melchizedek contends that Mother Earth and the terrestrial Kundalini energy do not act entirely independent of human intervention. He stresses the critical role of individual energy work in facilitating the serpent's energy. Did that work? The serpent, he asserts, can only move through a balanced energetic field of the earth. In Melchizedek's framework, terrestrial energy healing targets the dissolution of energy blocks and the preservation of the earth's energy field. This energy work ensures that the serpent's smooth journey and thus its healing potential. He views this healing process as addressing not just ecological crises, but primarily spiritual ones. Unlike other eco-spiritual approaches, Melchizedek's Kundalini-based perspective is therefore essentially anthropocentric, focusing on spiritual renewal as the key to planetary healing. Yes, and I thought that was a problem. That was the quote. So this example demonstrated how Kundalini was extended beyond its anthropological confines. In the context of Melchizedek's New Age and eco-spiritual approach, Kundalini became associated with the terrestrial body of Mother Earth, playing a central role in terrestrial energy healing and potentially serving as a response to ecological, social, and spiritual crises. To conclude, in this presentation, I have offered only a brief glimpse into Kundalini's modern reawakening. From the early 1880s onwards, the Serpent Kundalini received increasing attention from occultists, esotericists, and seekers of tantric and yogic and sexual magic insights. I have traced three distinct trajectories, including the theosophical reimagining of Kundalini as a form of subtle electricity, the OTO's appropriation of it as a potent current of sexual magical energy, and the eco-spiritual reframing of Kundalini as a terrestrial force whose therapeutic potential might not only arrest ecological collapse, but even catalyze an elevated planetary consciousness. It must be emphasized, however, that these examples represent only a narrow spectrum within the vast prism of Kundalini's modern manifestations. Within the dynamic landscape of a culture, the Serpent Kundalini has evolved into a genuine occult force that has continued to thread its way through esoteric imagination and practice. Thank you for your attention.